I'm Milton Curry. I'm Dean of the School of Architecture at USC. And it's great to welcome you all to the USC Spring, it's still spring, Lectures and Event Series. And very excited about this evening's lecture. Our lectures and public events this semester with the theme Capital, Elevate Conversations, Thinking and Creative Work that tackle various aspects of social, political, and financial capital from their silos and bring them to an ideological and theoretical fulcrum so that our perspective changes and that new possibilities emerge. Tonight, we turn our attention to issues of housing, social justice, the right to the city, the right to aesthetic pleasure, innovative environmental integration into design, and questions of power in architecture, urbanism, and real estate development. All of that and more are contained in almost every project of Brooks and Scarpa's rich corpus of built and unbuilt work. Angela Brooks is a recognized leader in the field of environmental and sustainable design and construction. She's pioneered more holistic ways of delivering affordable housing, sustainable architecture, and advances in social equity. She's been practicing architecture since 1991 and is responsible for the firm's development, specifically in the areas of housing and policy, leading the firm's innovative, sustainable, and sustainability initiatives and overall management. She was co-founder and past president of Livable Places, a nonprofit development company dedicated to building sustainable mixed-use housing in the city of Los Angeles on underutilized and problematic parcels of land as a reaction against Southern California's suburban sprawl. She has served as an advisor to the National Endowment of the Arts, Mayor's Institute on the City, and currently she sits on the advisory board of Solar Santa Monica, a program whose mission is to achieve net zero energy imports by 2020 for the city of Santa Monica, a model that can be replicated throughout the country. Larry Scarpa, no relation to Carlos Scarpa, which I thought when I was interviewing here. But I think Carlo would be proud to be associated with you because of the great work that you have done, the firm has done. So, Larry has received more than 100 major design awards, including 20 national AIA awards, 2014 Smithsonian Cooper Hewitt National Design Award, 2005 Record Houses, 2003 Record Houses, 2003 Rudy Bruner Prize, 5 AIA Coat Top 10 Green Building Awards, and was a finalist for the World Habitat Award, one of 10 firms selected worldwide. In 2004, the Architectural League of New York selected him as an emerging voice in architecture, and his work has been exhibited internationally, including at the National Building Museum in Washington, D.C. He has taught and lectured here at the University of Southern California and at numerous schools. He was a 2012 visiting professor at Harvard Graduate School of Design, the 2009 E. Fay Jones visiting professor at the University of Arkansas, the 2008 Ruth and James Moore visiting professor at Washington University, the 2007 Ilil Saarinen visiting professor at the University of Michigan. You get the idea. Larry has a talent and a passion for teaching. He is co-founder of Livable Places, Inc., nonprofit development agents company and public policy organization dedicated to building mixed-use housing on underutilized parcels of land. And most recently, he co-founded the Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute to help develop more sustainable and livable communities. What I most appreciate about Angela, Larry, and their work is the authenticity that they bring to their projects and the compassion that is exuded in the work itself towards low-income and homeless clients and users. Their work, along with that of others here at the school, has and is making USC architecture a leading voice and think tank for studying, designing, and researching alternative models of social housing, mixed-use housing, and new ways in which public and private capital can be leveraged to support the innate social capital that is actually the glue that holds our society together. Following tonight's lecture, there will be an opening reception for Brooks and Scarpa's exhibition, Salty Urbanism, right next to the courtyard on your way out of the lecture hall in the Verl Annis Gallery. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming our own Larry Scarpa and Angela Brooks.
The safety standard is the same. It's the same.
One of Leo's personal passions is finding out ways to provide environmentally safe housing to low-income families. Take a look.
We're standing here at the first green affordable housing project in the country. This is Larry Scarpa, the architect.
You get the idea. That was our first housing project, and we basically begged that client to hire us. And we thought we were just doing the right thing. You know, my mother would call it Jewish common sense. It was the first LEED certified building in the country. We actually helped them develop the standards, and we at the time just didn't think we were doing anything special.
It was a building that was designed to be energy neutral, so we had two active systems, solar panels and a microturbine. In the city of Santa Monica in 1994, they called themselves a sustainable city, but they were trying to formulate these goals for themselves as a city, so it was a demonstration project. And each unit was only 375 square feet. They were very tiny, and all you need really is one window on each side of your unit to get cross ventilation, keep the units cool. The whole project was designed to capture prevailing breezes and to really be a passive building, and I think all of you guys know what that is. 44 small studio apartments for people with extremely low incomes, and the project wears its energy generating solar panels on its sleeve. It has a large stormwater system under the public alley in the back that collects the rainwater from the entire block. And on a lot of the project images that I'm showing, I show you the density. This is 127 dwelling units per acre because we think there's a direct link between density and livability. The solar panels for us really gave this building a sense of dignity. We had to get state legislation changed to allow projects like this to be built. The solar system was actually larger than allowed by the state at the time. And each element on the building does more than one thing. The walkways actually shade the south facade of the building. The solar panels are hung off of the exit stairs. And we use really simple materials that are inexpensive and don't need maintenance. The walkways not only shade the building, they also hide the downspouts and gutters, which is one thing that I really hate on apartment buildings, actually seeing them. And they direct all the rainwater to the alley. And the solar panels that shade the walkways also let light filter through them. This building has no need for air conditioning, and it has very minimal heat. The units are really tiny, but basically it's everything you need. And this is a picture of the microturbine that sits on the roof, and the underground rainwater collection system that's in the alley actually services the entire block. It was a public-private partnership with the city at the time. But what was innovative with this building, which was about 20 years ago, is now mandatory in the state of California. Our codes in the state actually require us to design net zero energy residential buildings by 2020 and commercial buildings by 2030, and solar is really the only way to get there.
Yeah, when we finished this project, I mean, we got so many awards for it, and we had thousands and thousands of people come visit from all around the world, but yet we still felt like a little empty about the whole thing, as much as we received all these accolades. And you know, when I look at that building, you look at that image right there, that's downtown Santa Monica, and what you see on the ground floor is parking. You know, and we fought to try and do something on the ground floor that would be part of the city. And, all we heard was we can't do it because of our bylaws. We can't finance it. We can't do this. And what we started to find is all these obstacles in like affordable housing. We thought, it was easy. And our motive in some ways for getting into it was like selfish, because we'd look at other affordable housing projects and go, it's really easy to do better than the stuff they're building. But we began to think, are what we doing really any better than this? And so it was at that time we talked to some of our friends, and we started to meet in our office the first Saturday of every month to talk about issues surrounding housing, affordability, sustainability, and to work on ideas that, where we could not just change design, but change policy.
And also work with other developers. We knew Los Angeles needed to densify, so we actually held planning charrettes on the weekend, invited friends, and tried to visualize good neighborhood density. How many acres should one architect design in a neighborhood? And I think we came up with 2.
Well, this was something Roger Sherman did, where we looked at densifying the single-family neighborhood, which everyone was telling us was political suicide. And we're going to come round circle to this later in the talk.
Because Los Angeles hates 2 things, sprawl and density. We researched what other states were doing, and the state of Massachusetts has a law that's called the Anti-Snob Initiative, which means that any political jurisdiction, if you're not building enough affordable housing supply, if it's less than 10% of the total housing, then the zoning automatically is deemed discriminatory and could be ignored by any developer. So you can go into a single-family subdivision and build multifamily housing, affordable housing by right. They found that it also helped geographically disperse income levels. And we wanted to prioritize the benefits of good design as a way to both solve problems developers thought were intractable and create better living environments.
Yeah, we got an NEA grant to actually do a competition to build the project, which we did in Long Beach. This is actually Olivier Terrain's entry to our competition. He didn't win, but he was very close at the time. But we were, again, looking for new ways and new models of how we could provide housing in a slightly different way.
And this project is along the Blue Line on Long Beach Boulevard, and we discovered that City of LA was building transit and transit stops in areas that were zoned industrial where no one actually lived. So there was 0 people living within a quarter mile of this transit stop because it was illegal to build housing there. So when we went to the city and told them that, they said, no, that can't be right. And they said, where did you get your data? And we said, we got our data from you. And so at that point, they said, well, we have to change that. So they then upzoned Long Beach Boulevard to allow housing. But average monthly rents keep increasing, and we know that that eats up a large percentage of household incomes. Affordability is defined as not spending more than 30% of your income on rent, and in Los Angeles, almost a third of us spend more than half of our income on housing. And it used to be that if you worked, you could get ahead, but now what we have is called the working poor, and housing is getting more out of reach for everyone. At our current minimum wage, in every state in our country, 1 person working full-time with 2 kids would live near or below the poverty line.
Yeah, so after we were working with our group, we were just kind of a ragtag group of people, which were bankers, affordable housing developers, for-profit developers, architects, landscape architects, and we spent the better part of a year and a half, doing all these ideas, and we said, well, we should try and actually do something more meaningful. So we wrote some grants, and we wound up getting almost $1 million in grant money And so overnight, we became this nonprofit called Livable Places, and which was really our night job. When we started, it was our group, and eventually we wound up with a full board and doing policy work. And our goal was really to build model projects and use the developer fees to finance policy work. We didn't want to just do buildings. We were looking to affect change through policy. What turned out is our policy actually drove our development, but we did build some buildings.
So this is one of the first buildings we purchased, which is in Lincoln Heights, and it's the old Fuller Paint Company building. And it's an area just outside of Los Angeles, and we realized that our at the time new light rail, the Gold Line, went right by it. So it was another neighborhood where we built transit and no one actually lived there. A lot of industry was there. It's an industrial zone. So the site actually sits within a quarter mile of a Gold Line stop and a park and a school, and no one was living there.
That's right across from the old prison.
But with political support, the council member at the time, someone who agreed that we should actually have transit and housing in the same neighborhood, he agreed to work with us on this project. So we purchased the building, we added 2 floors to the roof. It's 102 condo units, both commercial and residential, so it's mixed use and mixed income levels. There's affordable housing in the yellow piece, the existing piece, and market rate housing above. We basically cut a hole in the middle of this big concrete building to let light and air get into all the units. And then we wrapped this large exterior patio and frames on the roof. You get really good views of the city and the mountains. But the principles of smart development were illegal at the time in this area, so this was really a demonstration for us, and we wanted to make an example that others could follow. It took us an entire year and 25 planning variances to allow what would be considered smart growth today. Things like reduced parking near transit, additional height, additional density, narrower streets. And it really became a symbol for the rebirth of this neighborhood, although a lot slower than I would have hoped. But it's within a bike ride of downtown LA. And the city has made some progress on the policy side with some of this stuff. And I think right now we'd probably only need 10 variances if we were going to build this building today.
Yeah, so when we bought that building, we paid a little under $3 million for it. And we had offers for the building at about $8 million before we actually started our project. And we built that project and barely got out alive. Our whole goal was to do it with without subsidies, public subsidies, so that we could not have the housing department telling us a bedroom needs to be a certain size, a closet needs to be a certain way, you have to have this many linear feet of kitchen countertops. And so we tried to do all through our own monies that we would get. Well, for-profit and nonprofit developers, we found out, are like oil and water. They just do not mix. So it was a really difficult project, and we were the first ones in that neighborhood, and part of our goal as an organization was to change the neighborhood. And so when we built this building, we were the first in. Developers came in and bought all the property around us. So we were now out of our own market, and we had kind of mixed feelings about it because we were like achieving our goals of helping revitalize the neighborhoods, but we were no longer a part of it because we couldn't afford it. And so most of you that are here now know what's happening with Lincoln Heights, and we were really the first people to go in there. So this is, not too long ago. This is this past year. Now the prison, the old prison is the city put out an RFP, and they're moving forward with these kind of grand plans for Lincoln Heights. And the sad part is this is what's happened to our project. These were meant to be, for the poorest of families, and now these projects are selling for $500,000 in there. So there's, this is something we struggled with as a group. Should someone be able to profit from their unit? How do you deal with keeping things affordable? And for us, it was all new for us and a bit of a learning experience.
And the market also crashed, right, when we started
Correct.
construction, minor detail.
But going back to what Angie was saying about, the city not knowing their, they would come up with these ordinances like promoting density around transit corridors, and we would show and prove to them that they had zero housing in their transit corridors. So we started to do all these different studies, and we became very close with the planning department. I'm not sure whether they liked the way we were, because we were basically, constantly throwing the planning amendments at them.
That was when the planning department just processed permits and didn't really do any other,
They didn't do planning.
yeah.
And so we were doing the planning for them, and like this one was a bikeway study. We showed them that LA actually had bikeways, but they were all disconnected. And this was our plan to show how they could stitch all the bikeways in LA together and make it like a unified system. The other thing we did, which really stuck, was we actually wrote the Small Lot Ordinance, which most of you are probably familiar with. That came from our group, and we put that forward as an idea, which goes back to that diagram I showed you that Roger sketched out one Saturday of densifying the single family lot. This effectively did that. If you know the ordinance, really it changed density in like a single stroke. And the city took it and they adopted it in a little bit different way than we wrote it. But now what's kind of happened, there's actually a website now for the Small Lot Ordinance. And it's, those of you who practice have probably done a lot of projects through this ordinance, and I'm just kind of tracing some of the history of what's happened about it, and even the projects that were built. We see them, they're not even ours. This one is our project, but some fantastic projects have been built through this, including ones that we continue to do. So we're benefiting from our own push to change policy. But like all good things, people start to question it. So we always thought policy was like forever, but what we're also learning, it's not permanent either. And so, now there's a lot of talk. They've made changes to this ordinance. And what's funny, when we go in there and talk to them about our projects, they tell us that, well, that's not the intention of the ordinance. And I go, well, that's kind of funny. I think I know a lot about what the intention of it is.
Who doesn't know who this is? Okay, everybody knows. You might wonder what state policy and bodybuilding have in common, but I will tell you. This is Arnold Schwarzenegger, who is a famous bodybuilder in California, who was also an actor. He was the Terminator, for those of you too young to have seen that movie. And then he became governor of California from 2003 to 2011. I believe that in order to create beautiful, sustainable buildings, our codes need to change, so the bottom needs to come up, and that is now happening in our state because of Arnold. He got a bill passed in 2006, which is called AB 32. And it's our state's long-term approach to addressing climate change in California. We always had pretty stringent codes, but it really wasn't enough. So when Schwarzenegger signed this bill, it cut gas emissions it was supposed to cut gas emissions by 25% by 2020. California met those targets in 2016, so we were actually 4 years ahead of schedule. And that's equivalent to taking 12 million cars off the road. So because we were so far ahead of schedule, the state decided to do another one, which is called SB 32, which requires us to double the current rate of this sustainability work that we're doing by 2030. But it takes real political leaders, and he was a real political leader, and that'll be his legacy. While we really think climate change is really important, we also think affordability is important, and we're falling behind on that. The good news is that in California, there are nonprofits that are solely dedicated to providing housing for homeless people. This is a project we're doing for Venice Community Housing. It's 35 units for previously homeless people. It's essentially a courtyard building that sits above commercial space, and we're going to start that this year.
That's in Venice, right across from Whole Foods.
And this one, which started as an empty parking lot in Santa Monica, our nonprofit clients, we find, are generally really innovative because they have these buildings for the long term. When we call it design equity, we think everybody deserves good design. This is for the nonprofit Step Up on 2nd. It's 46 units of studio apartments for people who were previously homeless with mental disabilities. It's mixed use, so it sits above an art gallery. Projects of this type generally suffer from things like a lack of depth, so we create that spatially and through the materials that we use. This is the east side of the building, so we screened the morning sun from those apartments, and then we built this big 4-story screen on the south side, and what we didn't realize when we did it was that it actually decreased the energy load of our building by 10%. And if you notice the density on this slide, which is super high, 267 units per acre in a type 5 building, that's almost as high as Manhattan in a 5-story building. And this building performs very well passively. The front facade is created from water jet cut aluminum panels anodized different colors. We look at something that can be standardized and then figure out ways to make it look more complex. So this is actually one pattern, the same size. All these panels were stacked up and were water jet cut one time. Well, actually 6 at a time. So it made it really cost effective, but it's really a beautiful and performative facade of the building at a relatively low cost.
And I'm just realizing too, we're still doing that, and our project's at a different scale now.
This is a plan of the building, and this is how we used to design buildings over 100 years ago when we didn't have air conditioning. They were called alphabet buildings. The plan of all the buildings actually looked like a letter because you had to design little courtyards in them so that all the units got natural light and cross ventilation. So that's what we did here. There are 2 small courtyards, 2 large rooms for kitchens. The units themselves don't have ranges. We tuck the elevator away, but every unit gets cross ventilation and light. The diagram is basically 3 boxes and a bar on one side, all connected by exterior walkways. And it's really an instance where policy and reality don't really align. We had to use mechanical lifts in a subterranean garage to park all the required cars there for a building with tenants where no one actually owns a car.
And the city funded this project. They made us do the parking. It cost $2 million to do the parking on this job. And they said if we didn't want to park, even though there was an exception in their municipal code for exactly these kind of projects, we were going to be required to do an EIR. And no person doing affordable housing, that's like the kiss of death. So we spent $2 million really just to not go through an EIR.
Our client, yeah, said just go ahead and do it. And our client, because he has a covenant for the next 60 years, cannot lease those parking spaces to anyone else either.
And it's 1 block from the Promenade. This is what's crazy about like affordable housing policy that we always try to change.
So more architects need to be policymakers, if you guys are getting that drift. But we take things like exit stairs and other required elements and try to actually make them into a design feature so that, for instance, people actually use the stairs rather than the elevator. The 2 big kitchens are these big recreation rooms that look into the main courtyards. And you can see the perforated screen gives it really nice perforated light. The units are super tiny. They're 240 square feet. But if you think about a homeless person going from the sidewalk to an apartment, for a lot of people, that's a really big step. And one of the tenants at this project told me he slept on his floor for an entire year before he could actually sleep in his bed. It was such a big step for him. But even at this size, we can get cross ventilation through the unit with a little transom window above the front door. And Murphy beds and a tall window really make your unit appear bigger. A lot of the affordable housing that we do design is what I call infill on really small lots. This is in Venice, the Delray neighborhood, and it has some of the smallest lots anywhere, Venice does. So this was 2 lots. It's 80 feet by 116 feet. It's a 4-story building, 21 one-bedroom apartment units, and it was basically conceived like 2 bars with an open space between them. The second floor has the tiny little courtyard on it. There's a tiny parking lot behind the front community room, but the site was so small that we had to put all the open space on the roof. And in Los Angeles now, every building rooftop has to be what we call solar ready. So you have to set aside a certain amount of the roof for future solar, because ultimately we're going to be a 100% renewable city. So benches and planters on the roof actually share the space with the solar panels. And you might think it's too expensive to build housing for homeless people, but leaving a homeless person on the street actually costs Los Angeles an average of $35,000 per year if you count medical, emergency, mental health services, and law enforcement. Jailing that person pushes that cost up by 1/3 to about $46,000 a person, and an investment of $10,000 can help that same person obtain housing, food, job training, and support services. So it's actually cheaper for us to house people and help them than it is to leave them on the street. But in Los Angeles, we're really not doing enough. So voters in 2016 approved a few ballot measures, actually by a landslide. I think 70% of the voters approved this, to fund housing and support services for the homeless issue that we have. And we voted to raise our sales tax by 1/2 cent to expand public transit. But we see articles that say we can't build it fast enough and we can't build it cheap enough. The money is there, but we still have homeless people on the street. The political will is really slow to change. This is a project that we did for the Skid Row Housing Trust, which is being used as an example or part of the solution. It's for homeless veterans, and it's called the 6. Almost 10% of our homeless are veterans. It was designed like a lot of our other projects, which is, it's a courtyard building so that all of the units can be passive. All the open space is in the courtyard and on the roof, and solar panels are on the roof.
Pretty much, this is a LEED Platinum as well. All the things we're showing you are mostly LEED Platinum. We don't talk too much about it. They just are.
And it's
I don't believe sustainability is a design concept. You know, it's more of a ethical decision. You know, I've never heard any of my friends go around and go, "Isn't my building great? It's ADA accessible." You know, I mean, it should just be code and we should move on. You know, we should just be doing it.
And we always try to talk to our clients about that as well. This one is in a neighborhood of already large apartment buildings, and it's 52 units. It's a combination of studios and 1-bedrooms. It captures all the stormwater. The courtyard on the second floor is shown here. There's a computer lab and parking on the first floor. The units span the front of the courtyard to create this sort of box. And it allows us to have different spaces for circulation or hanging out kind of throughout the building vertically. By stepping the courtyard down towards the sidewalk, you can sort of see it in this section. With a planter, it allows us to make a more protected environment for the tenants. And we had a group of tenants who were previously homeless actually advise us during the design of this building. So they have a visual connection to the street, but it's a physical separation. They didn't actually want to be physically connected to the street any longer.
You're giving up our secret where we get all our ideas from.
And it also, another thing it does by doing this to the courtyard is it eliminates the high, usually ugly guardrail that you see at the edge of the deck. So you can actually sit in this courtyard and see into the street and feel more connected to it, and you feel more open. It's Skid Row Housing Trust's first project off of Skid Row, And our Skid Row is a place which has the largest concentration of homeless people in the entire nation. These are images of the courtyard on the second floor, which is open to all of the units, so everyone actually circulates through this space. And there's a large kitchen, recreation room off of the courtyard with a large sliding glass door that opens. The art was provided to the client pro bono by the Marciano Foundation, so there's art everywhere hanging outside the building too. And the building's density is 153 units per acre, which is pretty high. The courtyard, though, is critical to the building performance and to allow the tenants to socialize. It's a much bigger building than some of the adjacent neighbors, but by creating this void space in the middle, it brings the scale of the building down. Most of the people walk to this building, so we really wanted this strong connection to the street. And so by kind of framing the building this way, it articulates the entry and makes it appear much more inviting and open. That's the computer lab, and actually the entry to the units above. And then the open spaces on the roof, the sculptural forms that we designed on the roof actually hide the code-required kitchen exhaust and subdivide the roof into smaller areas. So this is really a quiet, kind of zen-like space that has really great views of downtown LA. There is a direct correlation between the ceiling height of these small units, the height of the window, and the amount of natural light that gets into the space. On the right of this are two tenants that were featured in the AIA's I Look Up Film Challenge a couple years ago, and I'm just going to play a small clip of that film for you.
You want some water?
We've become a culture that ignores people and looks the other way. Our homeless problem, especially in Los Angeles, is so large now that it's almost untenable.
Los Angeles has the highest number of unsheltered people anywhere in the country, and clearly you can see that in Skid Row.
There's a lot of suffering that goes on. If you're not ready to live in the streets, it gets pretty profound.
For those individuals who have been largely isolated and alone, beginning to try to build
solutions to homelessness can look at it.
I've known Mike for a long time, and this is really our first collaboration. The name of this project is The Six that we did for Mike, and that means that, in military terms, it means I've got your back. And really, Mike is the six for homeless people.
I think I was one of the first people who had keys, and I thought I was dreaming. And I came in and looked, it was empty. I was like, whose house is this? They said, yours. I got a little radio, a microwave, a crock pot. What more can you ask for?
They have everything contained in their own unit, but then we have...
my breath away.
Because I've been suffering for a number of years. Suffering for years.
And what are you going to expect, you know?
Breaking stereotypes of the homeless goes back to design. It says something. It says we care about you.
Design definitely can empower individual. If you ask Mike, he'll tell you that good design is part of the healing.
A little bit like Frank Sinatra, if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere. No one has a bigger homeless crisis than we do here in Skid Row.
I think it's absolutely a replicable model. All you need is the will to do it.
These are our cities. Whatever we make here, whatever buildings we build here, they're part of the larger fabric that defines our cities.
We also design for private clients, not just nonprofit developers. And we don't design differently.
Danny's here.
I'm going to show two projects for our bosses right here, in the second row.
He's a USC guy, too.
For the Hillock Land Company in North Hollywood. And both of these projects, we use courtyards to reduce the energy loads, but also because people like them. They're social spaces. They're good ways to transition from the public street to the front door. These units all sit above commercial. It's a corner lot, which is really great. It used to be a gas station. We're using metal siding in both solid and perforated so that some walls appear solid and some translucent. But it's a really great articulated, relatively small building, 19 units. And this is another one for Danny called Camarillo Apartments, which also has commercial on the ground floor, and a portion of the units are affordable. It's organized around a courtyard again. It's on a busier street, but both of the projects are really designed from the inside out as a series of spaces for people to circulate and socialize. The way we design also stems directly from the climate of the region where the building exists. This is Rosa Gardens, and it's in the desert of Palm Springs. It's 57 units for families, and this is another project that was designed passively, but the climate's a little different. It's really a desert climate, which is sunny and dry and hot. The average temperature is 75 degrees, so what you want to do in that kind of climate is large overhangs. Shade is really important. So all of the buildings are organized around a series of on-grade connected courtyards of different scales, and we put the parking on the perimeter so that we could leave a lot of the open space internally for people. The colors of the building come from the landscape. June through September, the average high here is above 100 degrees. So we were really conscious of large overhangs and shade canopies, and recesses, and these spaces actually do more than one thing. They're circulation paths, and they're also gathering spaces for the people who live here. This is one of the smaller courtyards and the large courtyard, and this project was done for $76 a square foot. It's low, 2 stories, low and long, but for Palm Springs, they actually consider this a very tall building, big building. We use material changes to articulate the facades. And like all of our other projects, we use a variety of low-cost materials, stucco, metal panels, cement board. You basically leave your car on the perimeter and circulate through different kinds of public spaces to get to your front door.
And you talked earlier about step up and the perforated water jet cut panels on that building. And this is, we always have tough budgets, and so we're always trying to find a way to get the maximum design out of our project. And this is a market rate project in West Hollywood, and we worked with a company called C.R. Lawrence to design the shutters for our building. And it has, great views downtown, great views downtown east, and great views to the west. So you want big pieces of glass. It's counter to what works from a thermal perspective. It's also on a busy street, so big glass means privacy issues. So we kind of use the screen to mitigate a lot of those things, but also as a design idea. I got very interested in the idea of movement and how things could move and change. And so the screen for us became a way for the tenants to control their environment thermally. Also, when they wanted privacy, they could close it. When they want to be open, if people like to walk around in public naked, they could do that. If they don't, they can close the screen. So it became a way, in a way the building performed the function, but it also, from a design point of view, it literally changed every day or even every hour. And, what we learned is, yes, it costs money to put this on the building. And our client at first said, well, that's really expensive to do all that. Can we take it off? And I was like, yeah, you can take it off, So he's like, that's great. We just saved like a couple $100,000. And then our, mechanical engineer said, wait a second. Now we have to add more air conditioning because it's all exposed. Oh, and we also have to change the windows because they got to be higher performance. And it went on and on and on. And by the time they figured it all out, it was maybe about $50,000 difference. And our client said, you mean I can get all that for only $50,000? So suddenly it turned out to be a good deal. And it's a really simple idea. It's, pretty much a stucco box with a screen around the building, and you get these wonderful light-filled units with cross ventilation and so forth. And we did some other fun things. If you see that's the kitchen. If you look at the backsplashes, we went and got a bunch of recycled skateboards and we cut them up and made the backsplashes out of it. So, we always are looking as we ratchet up in scale, ways to do things creatively, but also work within budgets. This is about a 400-unit project just in downtown, 2 20-story towers. And, what every little dollar, developers are smart. They squeeze as much as they can out of you. So you got to find the ways. And in this case, we just kind of worked with the edges of the building or the balconies. So the units are what they are. We kind of looked at a concrete slab. This is normally what it would be. And if you could just shape the edges, which is very little cost difference, and if you look at how you configure that, you could get something which is pretty dynamic and interesting. And when you apply that over a large surface, it's pretty economical, but you can then adjust it to thermal conditions, you can adjust it for form, you can adjust it for a whole variety of reasons at very little expense. And so what you get then is a building which is both simple and rich, or simple and apparent, looks complex. And we get that a lot with our projects. Even a lot of the nonprofit developers, we hear sometimes when we get hired, they tell us, well, we were afraid to hire you because we thought your buildings were too expensive, and they're really not. We work hard at that cost issue.
So this is another project. We're working with the Southern California Flower Market in downtown LA to add 300 apartment units above their existing industrial building and their wholesale flower market. They have operated here since the 40s, actually the 30s. It's a wholesale flower market, and it started with the Japanese growers. They actually formed a real estate cooperative here before we interned the Japanese people during the war. After the war, they came back, and the only flower thing going on downtown was their real estate cooperative that they had formed. So they now own almost the entire city block. So we're working on this project with them. So this is their project. The edge of the block they don't own, but the rest of it they do. There are 2 existing concrete buildings that are 2 stories with parking on the roof. We're going to save 1 existing building, add a new piece, which is this residential tower in the middle, and remove the second building. This allows us to create an open paseo through the block. We're trying to also honor the flower through the design of this building, through the use of color and patterns. So the balconies that wrap the building, it's the method that Larry just described, but they are different colors, and they either appear as a honeycomb or these horizontal lines of color, which also shade the windows. This shows you the event space. We have City of LA has a lack of event space, so we're building a new event space above the parking.
That's too small.
The tower sits between the old and the new buildings, and it creates this open space below it. The existing building, you can see on the right, we're going to paint it with a big flower mural. The original industrial buildings had rooftop parking on both, so we're keeping that, and then creating more spaces above it for people to socialize.
It's about 22 stories, be concrete, all concrete building.
By putting it in the middle of the block, we're able to really capture a lot of sunlight, and then also by sort of twisting the top piece, we're able to get units with different views. This is an image of the new residential tower between the old on the right and the new on the left. And this is looking down into the paseo, which is going to be a public paseo through the block. The City of LA has designed guidelines for downtown LA that I think are really good, but they're just sort of principles and recommendations. But one of them is to actually not have a building that's longer than 150 feet, which I think is great, so people actually can circulate through the block. And people circulate up and down through the building above the Paseo.
It's just a similar strategy from the last project, playing with the edges, and then the resultant is a system that really appears quite complex, but really is pretty rational. We just finished up a design of a project in Shenzhen, China, that we use the similar idea. It's 2 towers, but it's built from the exact same size panel over the entire building. And so the way in which they're kind of placed, it's a single repeating element, and it's really gets its design and the way it's placed. But also, I never realized why all the housing projects in China look the same. It's because they all have, I was shocked at the daylight requirements for the units. And so even at the early on, you have to do this modeling that proves how you're getting daylight into the unit. So it can result in what appears to be some pretty dynamic plans. And again, this is shaped, the core is a pretty rational core, and it's just the perimeter that shapes to give you a building that, like the Cherokee lofts, as you move around it, the building in a way appears to move. When we finally disengaged ourselves from Livable Places, it was kind of our night job, and we did that for close to a decade, and went sort of back to our regular job. Angie, in some ways, had enough. I did too, but I kept thinking, and I had this idea to do something more with affordable housing. And I was having dinner with a friend of mine who at the time was the head of the NEA, and I told him about this idea. He said, "You need to write a grant." So I wrote a grant, and we got a $50,000 grant. And
So if you don't know Larry, he doesn't say no to anyone. He never says no.
So it was this idea modeled after the Mayor's Institute on City Design, where we would educate developers, nonprofit developers, on how to do better housing projects. And we would bring in architects, landscape architects, developers, and hold this 3-day institute. And it was meant to be a one-time deal. We're now on our 9th year doing it. So it's called the Affordable Housing Design Leadership Institute. And what we do is a developer applies for it, and they bring a real project to us in the schematic stage, and we use our resource team to help them. We pay for them to travel to where we hold our institute, and our resource team works with them to make their projects better. During this 3 days, the resource team does lectures, which they attend, and it's kind of amazing now. We've taught or helped almost 100 developers, and we've had some real naysayers and some real dogs of projects come in, and we don't win them all, but we have people that it's fundamentally changed how they do business. There's an organization out of Brooklyn, New York, I won't name names, but they came with a really bad project to one of our first institutes. And now the executive director, he's not really invited, but he comes every year anyways. But as part of the institute, we also publish the proceedings from the institute, and you can go online and download everything for free. And we also do other publications that show, that make cases for well-designed affordable housing. And all of this stuff is free. We've even developed a pre-development design toolkit for developers. If you look at a pie chart, and we've made these within our organization, the architect is the little speck within the chart of how affordable housing gets done. So what our goal was to really make the design a big dot as opposed to a little tiny dot. And this is a vehicle that's kind of helped do that. So what I like to say is Angie and I work in parallel universes. We have our traditional practice where we're building buildings, but we're also working on a different front that maybe makes bigger changes so that we don't always have to fight with the city or the building department to make the change. It becomes law and we just follow the rules that we like. But this is a big project in the panhandle of Florida. This is 700,000 acres. This is what our client refers to as their B property. It's not on the coast, but it's like incredible. If you were to drive this from end to end, it's 21 miles. And so they have to preserve a lot of this land. And they've asked us to look at ways to make it denser and do like new communities. They have this idea for a senior community, and they've shown us these pictures of this place called The Villages in Central Florida that's making like a killing financially. So they showed us all these great pictures of retirees having fun and doing all this. And so we did our own research. This is what it looks like. So we began to wonder, like, what's the magic there? But as we continue to do our research, we also find this. It's got the
highest rate.
The highest rate of STD in the entire country. It's like crazy. It's like a big party there, and there's some good things. There are like almost no cars. It's like, so there are some things going for it. It's like, look at this. This is like they have their own like specially designed carts, but they're living in this kind of environment, which is just typical tract home. So, we tried to think, how can we make it a better community, more walkable? So we started looking at, places like Savannah and Charleston and looking at how, cities existed before cars and like the blocks, what makes walkable cities. So, our research sort of focused around like, how do you make a neighborhood or how do you make a block? So we came up with these strategies for configuring blocks. And so we developed a series of model types that could interchange within a block. So a typical suburb is between 3 and 7 units per acre. This is about 15 units per acre. And so it also is designed so that it could move easily around a lot of existing vegetation. So it focused kind of on this block where we have a townhouse model. They're small units, compact on a particular site, and they all share a park on each block. So it's a small block so that you can walk, and each park could have its own, it could be a bocce ball on one, a garden in the other. So like the people would walk to each block, and they have shared parking and place for guests. So here's what a courtyard might look like. And then this is the townhouse model where they're actually joined together and they share space. This is what it might look like, and their courtyard. And then you can see how the units work together. So you want to talk about that? This one? Yeah.
Sure. In Los Angeles, the vacancy rate is among the lowest nationally. I think our vacancy rate is like 3% in 2017, and it's remained unchanged since 2012. So we know we need to do something about that.
Oops, sorry.
It's okay. And we were recently honored with a grant from LA County. They had a Housing Innovation Challenge, and they were awarding $4.5 million for ideas about how to solve the problem of homelessness. And we won $1 million with Community Corporation of Santa Monica and Plant Prefab.
And Steve's here, our partner here from Plant Prefab.
And so we developed sort of a design toolkit called Nest, which is really a kit of parts to actually solve this problem.
Yeah, when we took this on, we were kind of thinking more like an RV. Part of the problem here is getting it to market quickly. And, you know, if you could take a house and just drive it onto a site that was self-contained, you could have instant housing. What really bogs us down is getting permits and doing things like that. So we were thinking along those lines where you can almost just plug in and it would be a self-contained unit, but maybe, you know, something with a little more charm, or that could be personalized like that. So, you know, we came up with this idea of not, which is a weird thing, a toolkit where we were kind of the designers, but we really are providing a framework for others to also do housing.
One of the things we realize is that as we develop this housing, as we have over several years, we repeat a lot of the same things. A lot of the units are the same size, a lot of the shared spaces are the same. So we were thinking how could we standardize that? So Plant Prefab, who designs modular sustainable homes, was the perfect kind of tool, we thought. And we could tailor that process to meet affordable housing guidelines so that any developer can go and get a module for any site and any type of unit. So we know that most of LA has been gridded on a typical suburban lot of about 50 by 150. So we started with that size, and we made sure that the modules would work on a lot of that size with typical setbacks, or a combination of the typical suburban lot. And we developed this kit of parts. We also know, some of you may have heard recently or seen the articles that have been in the newspapers, that we now have homeless college students. 60% of the 40,000 students surveyed at dozens of California community colleges actually reported being housing insecure, and 19% of them say they're homeless. So housing college students is a big issue that we should all be thinking about. So we need more housing types, and that means that we need more shared spaces. So these modules are actually shared spaces. They're common kitchens, they're workspaces, they're shared bathrooms, and then on the top are these small sort of energy module plugins.
And we have power and water plugins that go with it. So ideally, you could just take these to the site and have instant housing while we then go through a permitting process to get utilities and other things.
These are the dorm-type modules with beds, and these are called Blue Jay. We've named them by birds, and all of them are based on the nesting habits of birds. Blue jays never use the same nest twice, so our shared living arrangement is the Blue Jay. And they all have standard components that can be mixed and matched. And so depending on the site, the density, or the neighborhood, any component can be used up to 5 stories.
And we've left room, just enough room so that you can, you know, an architect can work with the perimeter or edges of the building to kind of customize it in a way that works for them.
Mm-hmm. You can customize it for the orientation or the context. This is how it might lay out in a shared living arrangement on a double lot. This is a single lot. This is in a single family or multifamily neighborhood. And it's really meant to be a long-term solution that can be replicable throughout the county of LA.
And this is, we're working on this right now. This is for college students. It's on a church parking lot. So we're, you can just see kind of generally how the configuration of lots are. This is a 18-bedroom, single-family house.
13 bedrooms.
Well, 13 bedrooms plus the studies.
It's an
and everything.
R1 zone. So we're building a big house in an R1 zone, and you're allowed to do an ADU unit in Santa Monica, and it's allowed to be attached. So this is a big, I think it's 5,000 square feet.
A little under 5,000.
A big house for less than 16 people.
So there you can see it, how it might sit on the site. And this is another one we're working on too. This is a 7-story building. You can kind of see these are prefab 1 and 2 bedroom modules. That's on another typical height, and this one will be 7 stories. So we're working out through this now how these actually work. So the first ones we're going to build, and Steve Glenn and Plant Prefab, we're hopefully going to come to market in due time with modules that everyone here could buy and work with and make them their own. So I want to just close for a minute here to say a couple words about our exhibit. We spoke about housing. You know, it's kind of interesting now that we've practiced for enough time. I remember having to really work hard to find enough material to speak for an hour. Now it's hard to edit things. So it's not, we don't only do housing, but it's a big interest of ours. But this is something else which we've been working on for the last 5 years. And this started with a grant from NOAA. We got a very large grant from NOAA to look at coastal areas. Angie and I both grew up in Florida. And Florida is basically a river of grasses. And what's happening now is the coastal areas of Florida are seeing big problems with water. And what's essentially happening is that the land is being attacked on literally 5 fronts. So we're not just getting sea level rise, but we're getting a groundwater surcharge, which is pushing the freshwater lens up to the surface. And then we have intercoastal coming, pushing the other direction, and lots of rain. So what's happening now in Florida as a common occurrence, this is not after a storm. This is what everyone in South Florida refers to now as sunny day flooding. And what happens is on just a sunny day, when tides are right, the water starts backing up through the storm drains. So this is salt water about a mile away from the ocean coming through the storm drains, and it's happening with greater frequency. Our team has a lot of scientists and engineers on it that have been looking at this. So it's really a common occurrence. The cities are really desperate in trying to find ways to deal with it. So some of the things they've done is put check valves on their storm drains so it doesn't back up. Then you get water that sits in the pipe, so they're getting mosquitoes that are breeding in them. So now they have trucks that go around and suck out the water out of the storm pipes, and they dump it in the intercoastal, and it's killing all the natural vegetation. So, you know, our work has been kind of focused on what can we do in these coastal areas to kind of live with it. I've taken my students from USC down to South Florida to see, you could see Nora on the end. She's the only one who came with rain boots. That's typical Nora style. But it's happening with great frequency, and things like this are happening. That's beautiful Fort Lauderdale Beach. Right after they spent about $7 million to bring in sand to re-nourish the beach. They can't even pump it from the beach. So they go to Central Florida and they truck it in to make their beaches really look nice. And then here comes the storm. That's that same view. It's gone, all the sand. It's also happening here, and we're just starting to look at, coastal Southern California. This is Venice from 1938, and we're getting flooding there now too on greater frequencies, but we're going to see this happen. And so we've been working with not just the Los Angeles officials, but with officials in Florida to come up with strategies on how to deal with sea level rise. So we've developed what we call ADAPT toolkit, and we've basically are putting together what we hope to be a book within the next 18 months to come out, which are strategies for, again, looking at how people can build in coastal regions. And I'm just showing you some of the diagrams and drawings from what we did, but we're basically taking scientific data and putting it into formats where regular people can read it, and it becomes almost like a menu book for what to do. And we've done studies of areas this one is in Fort Lauderdale, and showing city officials what can happen to their neighborhoods. This is an area called North Beach, and this is with 3 feet of sea level rise in that area. So we've shown strategies about how we can embrace the water. Our students have even presented to the officials. There's 3 of them that are here tonight, and Sunny in the middle, or on the end, she's going to be going to grad school at Harvard next year, right? So, but this is some of the student work where students can, they can do things that professionals can't do. I always try and tell them, you have incredible power because you don't understand the politics, which is a good thing. And people, if I were to show this design to a public official, I would be murdered. But because a student does it, it's okay. So they think it's not real, but it's amazing how they do this work, and it receives good attention.
Well, we did. One of the images was in the Argonaut, the Venice master plan that you guys did, and it was there, and a few homeowners got really upset because their properties were underwater. And we said, well, it's just a student project, so don't worry about it.
And this is what Venice is particularly vulnerable. This is with 1.5 feet of sea level rise, and it's basically in a bowl. And when they built the marina, think of like a cork at the end of the marina that's keeping water from flooding Venice. And so we undertook this with students here, and Claire, as I saw here tonight, she's one of the students who participated in this, and we engaged the city in doing this. And again, I'm just showing you some of the things that students have kind of participated in to help raise awareness about some of these things.
Jeff Huber.
Yeah, and our partner in Florida, Jeff Huber, has really spearheaded a lot of this work with his ongoing research. So go see the show. It's by no means comprehensive, but it'll give you a kind of flavor of what we've been doing there. Thank you very much.